We're going to talk about anatomy. My mother once said there are 3 things guaranteed in life. Number 1, life. Number 2, death. And number 3, having to study for gross anatomy. With that being said, let's start with organs located in the actual abdominal cavity, starting with the liver. So the liver is actually one of the largest organs in the human body. And the liver has many functions, but some of those common functions include detoxification of toxins, medications, and nutrients. So it acts as a filtration system. Another major function of the liver is it's going to be a source of glucose, so it stores glucose, and then it also has something known as glycogen located in it, and glycogen can actually be broken down via the hormone known as glucagon, and glucagon will cause that glycogen to be converted into glucose, which can then go into systemic circulation and increase your overall blood glucose levels. So it stores and releases glucose. And it also synthesizes a silly little substance known as bile. And bile, for you fast food enthusiasts out there that like to get your 3-for-1 Whopper meals at Burger King, is mainly responsible for emulsifying / breaking down fat. So if you eat a high-fat meal, such as the common American diet, you're going to need bile to efficiently break down those fats so you don't get gastrointestinal issues or abdominal discomfort or heartburn. So yeah. Speaking more of the structure of the liver, so the liver can be located in the right hypochondriac region, less specifically the right quadrant. And part of the liver, I forgot to say this, so there's 4 lobes that make up the liver. You have the caudate, the quadrate, the left lobe, and the right lobe. The actual left lobe of the liver will be located more in the epigastric region of the abdominal cavity, and the right lobe will be located in the right hypochondriac region of the abdominal cavity. So it technically is in 2 quadrants. So just keep that in mind. But we're going to go on to the actual structure of the liver here. So as you can see, here is the right lobe. Here's the left lobe. Now this silly little ligament right here is known as the falciform ligament, and that's going to separate the right lobe from the left lobe. And at the bottom of the falciform ligament is actually going to be something known as a ligamentum teres. So the inferior aspect of the falciform ligament is known as ligamentum teres. Now the superior aspect of the liver is actually going to have another ligament. This technically could be divided into separate portions, but you're going to have coronary ligaments that actually connect the liver to the diaphragm. So this muscle up here is actually the diaphragm, and relevance of the diaphragm is it's what actually separates the abdominal cavity from the thoracic cavity. And it's not seen on here, but over here you would have a ligament known as the triangular ligament, and over here you would have another triangular ligament, and we'll see that more on another diagram I have here shortly. And remember, this is an anterior / ventral view of the liver. So we're also going to take a look at the posterior dorsal view of the liver in the next slide. But just keep in mind, there's 4 lobes and there's a couple ligaments that you need to know. Falciform ligament, coronary ligament, ligamentum teres, and then there'd be a triangular ligament here, and on the anterior side, you can see the right lobe and the left lobe. And if you ever need to figure out what lobe you're looking at, find the falciform ligament. On the right side of the falciform ligament, right lobe, left side of the falciform ligament, left lobe. And then number 4 right here I have labeled just so you have some more anatomical knowledge. That is your stomach. Okay, so this abomination of a creature is the posterior / dorsal view of the liver. And here's where you're going to find your other 2 lobes. So at the top, you're going to have your actual caudate lobe, labeled as B. And at the bottom, more inferiorly, this little lobe right here is the quadrate lobe. Now, this dehydrated ball sack looking structure is not actually the liver. This is your gallbladder, and this is where bile synthesized by the liver is actually stored. Now, in the lab, it's going to appear green, but when it's not embalmed, it's actually white. So it's not actually green in real life. That's why it's not green in this photo, because this hasn't been embalmed yet, actually. We'll talk about the gallbladder here shortly. So vasculature of the liver. Much like my life, it is very, very unique. So it has dual circulation. And you're asking yourself, what the hell is dual circulation? Well, let me tell you what dual circulation is, my friend. Dual circulation means that the liver is provided both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So 75% of the blood, majority of the blood delivered to the liver, is actually deoxygenated and delivered via a vein known as the portal vein. The other 25% of that blood is oxygenated and delivered via the proper hepatic artery that branches off into the right hepatic artery and left hepatic artery. And you're probably asking yourself, well, this is really freaking weird because majority of organs want oxygenated blood. It's the oxygenated blood that provides the organ's tissue with the nutrients needed for normal cellular function. Well, it's still getting 25% of oxygenated blood, meaning the tissue is able to sustain itself. But remember, one of the main functions of the liver is detoxification and filtration, meaning that all of the deoxygenated blood traveling from other organs in the body, such as the pancreas, the spleen, the kidney, and the GI, are going to have trace amounts of toxins and other bad things that are traveling back towards the heart. That deoxygenated blood is going to be traveling back towards the heart. Before it actually makes its way back to the heart, it's actually going to go through the liver as deoxygenated blood through that portal vein, and the liver will perform its detoxification and filtration job to make sure none of those trace toxins or bad substances make their way back into the heart and get supplied systemically all throughout the body. So that's why majority of the blood is actually deoxygenated, traveling to the liver, and not oxygenated, because its main job is to filter all those bad things out of the deoxygenated blood traveling back towards the heart. So let's take a look at the vasculature more in depth on a diagram. So before we look at the vasculature on a cadaver, there is a structure we need to know. It's called the porta hepatis. The porta hepatis is just a small depression on the inferior aspect of the liver. So if you'll see here, here's the actual common bile duct. Here would be the hepatic duct, and here would be the cystic duct of the gallbladder. And here's that proper hepatic artery branching off into the left hepatic artery and the right hepatic artery. These actually enter into the porta hepatis, except for the cystic duct. That's just going to go into the gallbladder. But the proper hepatic artery and the hepatic duct of the actual gallbladder will go through the porta hepatis to go into the actual liver. So all the porta hepatis is it's just an opening for vasculature to enter the liver on the inferior aspect of the liver. And in order to access the porta hepatis, you're going to want to go underneath this structure I'm pointing out with my laser pointer. That is known as the lesser omentum. And if you cut away the lesser omentum, you can see that small little opening / depression on the inferior aspect of the liver. Now, just for some more knowledge, this blue line here is indicating the lesser curvature of the stomach, and this red line is indicating the greater curvature of the stomach. And then this that looks like a bunch of fat is actually known as the greater omentum. Here, underneath the greater omentum, you would actually find the transverse colon. Here is your descending colon, and here is your ascending colon. And right here, if you don't know what this is yet, you should probably drop out of anatomy, because by now you should know that this is the spleen. And no, my friend, it is not the color of Barney in the human body. It is actually more reddish and pink in the human body. We just draw it as purple on diagrams. And then there's our silly little friend right here, the falciform ligament. So let's go on to the vasculature a little bit more in depth. So right here is the aorta, and a major branch of the aorta, more specifically, this is the abdominal aorta. We'll talk about that in another lecture, but this is actually the abdominal aorta, because once it actually crosses the aortic hiatus, which separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, it's a small opening that the aorta travels through, it becomes the abdominal aorta. So here's the abdominal aorta, and branching off of the abdominal aorta, you're going to have the celiac trunk. Now, the celiac trunk has 3 branches. You're going to have the common hepatic artery, you're going to have the splenic artery, that's that thick little boy right here, and then you're going to have what's known as the left gastric artery. Now, following the common hepatic artery, it's going to branch into 3 things. You're going to go into the proper hepatic artery right here, you're going to go into the gastroduodenal artery right here, and then you're going to go into the actual right gastric artery. And the right gastric artery and the left gastric artery actually meet each other. And then the splenic artery will, of course, keep traveling to the spleen to supply blood to the actual spleen. Now, one more thing to know, this is actually very well indicated on this diagram, is if you follow the splenic artery, you'll notice it branches off to this artery right here. This is actually known as the left gastroepilopoic artery. And then if you follow the gastroduodenal artery right here, this is known as the right gastroepilopoic artery. So the ones we're most concerned about with the liver, though, is going to be the celiac trunk, which branches into the common hepatic, the left gastric, and the splenic. Common hepatic will then branch off into the right gastric, gastroduodenal, and the proper hepatic. And the proper hepatic artery will actually branch off into the right hepatic artery and the left hepatic artery. And then here, underneath it, right here, is the portal vein. So if you find the actual proper hepatic artery, underneath it, that large tube-like structure in the lab will actually be your portal vein. And here's a simplified diagram below. So in the green, that's the abdominal aorta. In the red, that's the celiac trunk. And then in the yellow, it's branching off into the actual left gastric artery. It's also branching off into the purple splenic artery, traveling towards the spleen. In blue, we have the common hepatic artery. And in yellow, we have the right gastric artery. And then from the common hepatic artery, you will have the proper hepatic artery branching off into the left hepatic artery and right hepatic artery. And inferior to that, you will have the gastroduodenal artery traveling inferiorly. And then underneath the proper hepatic artery, you will have the portal vein in gray. So on a cadaver, it can seem a little bit more complex, but it's actually not that bad. So first thing you're going to want to find that branch, the celiac trunk. It's this little notch right here. And this artery right here that I'm highlighting with my laser pointer, can anyone tell me what that is? This is not a classroom, so you can't raise your hand, so I'm just going to tell you. This is actually the left gastric artery. As you can notice, its circumference is much smaller than the circumference of the actual splenic artery, so it is thinner than the splenic artery. Right here is the splenic artery traveling towards the spleen. Here is your common hepatic artery. Then branching off the common hepatic artery, you're going to have your proper hepatic artery, and then you're going to have the actual right hepatic artery, left hepatic artery, and right here is the actual cystic artery, if you see that. And then right here that I'm highlighting, traveling down towards the stomach, is the actual right gastric artery that will actually meet the left gastric artery. And then here, if you keep following the gastroduodenal artery, you'll see the actual right gastroepilopoic artery. And then if you could see the splenic artery, it's behind the stomach, a bunch of other tissue. It would actually go into the left gastroepilopoic artery, which is right here. And then just a little bit more knowledge for you. Here's your gallbladder. Here's the fundus of the gallbladder, the body of the gallbladder, and the neck of the gallbladder. And then from the neck of the gallbladder, you're going to go into the actual cystic duct. And then from the cystic duct, you'll go into the common bile duct. And then here is the actual hepatic duct of the gallbladder. And it will go into the actual left hepatic duct and right hepatic duct. And when the liver, right here, actually synthesizes the bile, it travels through the left and right hepatic duct. And then it goes into the common hepatic duct to either deliver the bile down through the common bile duct into the descending duodenum, or it will send that bile up through the cystic duct to be stored in the actual gallbladder. And then, of course, here's your stomach, here's your liver, and yeah. So this can look like a little bit of a mess. Let me erase some of this stuff for you. It looks disgusting, does not look yummy whatsoever. So in the cadaver, it can look a little bit different than the diagram, but once again, find that celiac trunk. To find the celiac trunk, you're going to have 3 branches. This first branch right here, that is your left gastric artery, I have in red. Underneath that, traveling towards the spleen in green, is the actual splenic artery. And then in blue, right here, we have the common hepatic artery. And then remember, that can branch into three things. That can branch into the proper hepatic artery and the gastroduodenal artery. So in green, right here, you have the gastroduodenal artery. And then in purple, you have the proper hepatic artery. And if you followed this, that would go into the right hepatic artery and the left hepatic artery. And then also the cystic artery would be up in there too. And then also branching off this, you can't see it very well, you would also have the right gastric artery coming off, which I just drew in orange, but you can't see it very well on this cadaver. And then underneath there, right here, where my laser pointer is, you have the actual portal vein. Now remember, the proper hepatic artery is what delivers the 25% of oxygenated blood, and the portal vein is what delivers 75% of the blood deoxygenated for filtration purposes to the actual liver. Now, just some more knowledge for you. This is the pancreas. We're going to talk about this here shortly. And as you can see, it can be somewhat hard to identify because it just looks like a bunch of adipose tissue. Looks like something your cat threw up after eating a squirrel. And it is directly underneath that celiac trunk and that common hepatic artery. So if you find the common hepatic artery and you find the celiac trunk, inferior to it would be the actual pancreas. And it looks like just a big blob of fat. And it's going to have a couple of different sections we'll talk about here shortly. But here you can see the tail. The tail is going to go towards the actual spleen, and then the actual head of the pancreas and the neck of the pancreas and the body of the pancreas is going to be more towards the duodenum. So next organ we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the gallbladder. Now the gallbladder is quite useless, much like me. So when we think of the gallbladder doesn't really serve that much of a purpose. Remember, the gallbladder doesn't synthesize the bile. The gallbladder just stores the bile. The gallbladder can also be called what we call a vestigial structure. So a vestigial structure means that our ancestors from long times ago, before evolution, when we were just evolving, maybe had a bigger usage of this actual organ. Nowadays, we've evolved to the point where the organ has become somewhat useless and actually poses more problems than it actually helps with. And that's why we consider it a vestigial structure. That's why many people can actually have their gallbladder removed, because it's not necessary for survival. It's just considered a vestigial structure. Our ancestors before evolution might have had a much bigger usage of this organ, but nowadays it just kind of sits there and stores bile and secretes it when needed. We don't really need a place to store bile because the liver, remember, still has that common hepatic duct that can still deliver the bile into the actual descending duodenum for fat emulsification / breakdown. So that's why we call it a vestigial structure. Like I said, the function of the gallbladder is the storage of bile. It does not synthesize bile, it just stores it. That is a big thing to know. The liver produces the bile, the gallbladder stores the bile and secretes it during digestion. And just for some extra knowledge, the gallbladder actually isn't green in the human body when you're performing surgery. So none of you here are probably ever going to be performing surgery in the abdominal cavity, and if you are, you're probably getting malpractice. I don't know why a dentist would be in the stomach trying to remove a gallbladder, but I don't know. If you ever do for some reason remove the gallbladder as a dentist, I'll probably see you on the news, but you wouldn't see it as green, you'd see it as white. It is not the green gallbladder in ham, it's actually the white gallbladder in ham, stated by my favorite author, Dr. Seuss, the OG. So here's the structure of the gallbladder. So the gallbladder can be broken up into three structures. You have the fundus, which is the top portion that you will actually see hanging underneath the liver. So that portion you actually see drooping underneath the inferior aspect of the liver, that's going to be the fundus. In the middle of the gallbladder, you're going to have the body, and then the neck is going to be the bottom portion of the gallbladder. The neck is what empties into the cystic duct that meets the common hepatic duct, and the common hepatic duct actually has two branches into the liver. It's going to have the right hepatic duct and the left hepatic duct. This can seem a little confusing, but it's actually not as bad as you think. So let me erase that. So when the liver, right here, synthesizes the bile will travel through the right and left hepatic duct into the common hepatic duct, and it can either continue traveling through the common bile duct until it meets a place known as the ampulla valor, which we'll talk about here shortly, and then release it into the descending duodenum, or that bile can travel up, follow my laser pointer, through the cystic duct into the neck of the gallbladder to be stored as bile in the case of needing to store it for other digestive purposes later on down the line. Besides that, you're going to have your pancreas over here. The pancreas has a duct known as the main pancreatic duct, and the main pancreatic duct will actually meet the common bile duct at this point known as the ampulla valor, and then both will release their contents into the descending duodenum, which we'll talk about here in the next slide. Okay, so one more time. You're going to have the fundus right here of the gallbladder, body of the gallbladder, neck of the gallbladder, cystic duct, common hepatic duct. You're going to have the right hepatic duct, left hepatic duct. Common hepatic duct will actually meet the cystic duct at this point right here. Bile from that will either travel through the cystic duct into the gallbladder or continue to travel down through the common bile duct. And remember, the common bile duct will actually meet up with the main pancreatic duct at the ampulla valor before being emptied into the actual descending duodenum. One more time, here's another diagram. So there's those triangular ligaments I was talking about earlier on in the liver. So remember, you have the falciform ligament, and then you have the coronary ligaments, the superior aspect in green, and then in pink here, more laterally, you're going to actually have what we call the triangular ligaments. But we're not here to talk about ligaments right now. We're here to talk about the gallbladder, so let's get to that. There's the fundus of the gallbladder. Like I said, it's kind of sticking out underneath the actual liver. There would be the body of the gallbladder. There would be the neck of the gallbladder, and there's that cystic duct. So the bile is going to be released from the neck of the gallbladder into the cystic duct. It will meet the actual common hepatic duct. There is the actual right hepatic duct, left hepatic duct, common hepatic duct, cystic duct. They meet here. Then you go into the common bile duct. Common bile duct will continue to travel down through the pancreas. It will actually meet up with the main pancreatic duct right here, and they meet at the ampulla valor, and then they are released through an opening in the descending duodenum known as the actual duodenal papilla. This is the major duodenal papilla, and the duodenal papillas are actually maintained and monitored via a musculature system known as the sphincter of Oddi. So the sphincter of Oddi, when it contracts, actually closes the duodenal papilla so that the bile and enzymes from the main pancreatic duct can't enter the descending duodenum. And the point they meet, ampulla valor, the opening, the duodenal papilla, and the muscle that controls the duodenal papilla is the sphincter of Oddi. And here it is a little bit better. So the pink arrow is just representing your descending duodenum. There's the main pancreatic duct right here, highlighting with my laser pointer. And green right here is the actual common bile duct. Common bile duct and main pancreatic duct meet at the ampulla valor. The opening in the descending duodenum where they both meet is known as the duodenal papilla. And the point on the outside where they meet is known as the ampulla valor. And then the musculature that controls the opening of the duodenal papilla is known as the actual sphincter of Oddi. And then there are technically two duodenal papillas. There is a minor duodenal papilla and a major duodenal papilla. The major duodenal papilla is the one the common bile duct and the main pancreatic duct empty into. The minor duodenal papilla is only for the pancreas. A little bit clinical relevance for the actual gallbladder. So if you look on the CT scan, here is the liver. There's your kidneys, spleen, stomach right here. And this area right here is the actual gallbladder. And what you notice about this gallbladder is there's some regions that are darker than the other regions. Those darker specks are actually gallstones, which is just hardened / calcified digestive material. And gallstones don't usually pose much of a problem, but over time they can get to the point where they're so large that they're causing abdominal discomfort. And those gallstones can actually get clogged in the actual cystic duct or the common bile duct, which can then cause a backflow of bile, which can cause other digestive problems and can lead to nausea, cramping, fatigue, stuff like that. If you do have to remove the gallbladder, you will perform a colestomy, and a colestomy is when you just remove the gallbladder. And for a test question, you'd probably just see a CT scan. They would ask what organ is abnormal. If you see the gallbladder with those black specks in it, that means it has gallstones and there's a problem. Not really always a problem, but could be a problem. So on a cadaver, here's what it would look like more or less. So here is the actual proper hepatic artery right here. There it is. And then you're going to have your right hepatic artery, your left hepatic artery. Underneath that, you're going to have the portal vein. And then over here, you would have the common hepatic artery. We already went over that, so let's pose our attention to the actual gallbladder. So here's the gallbladder right here. Fundus, body, neck, cystic duct, hepatic duct, remember the common hepatic duct, and the cystic duct meet, and then they become the common bile duct, this green line traveling down. So cystic duct, common hepatic duct, common bile duct traveling down to the major duodenal papilla and the ampulla velar. One word, diabetes. Ow, my pancreas. So the pancreas is located in the epigastric region. So we would find the pancreas in the epigastric region, and the pancreas is a long tail-like structure that just looks like fat. Like I said earlier, it looks like something your cat threw up after having a nice little meal. The pancreas is responsible for secreting glucagon and insulin, but it also has exocrine function. So the pancreas will have an endocrine function and an exocrine function. The endocrine function of the pancreas is going to be the secretion of insulin and glucagon. Insulin actually travels through systemic circulation to reach cells all throughout your body to actually allow those cells to uptake glucose much more efficiently so that the glucose can be broken down via glycolysis. So when the pancreas secretes insulin, it actually decreases blood glucose levels. And when the pancreas secretes glucagon, glucagon will actually travel to your liver. And remember, I told you the liver stores glucose as glycogen. And when the glucagon makes its way to the liver, it can cause the conversion of glycogen to glucose, and then that glucose can be put into systemic circulation and actually increase your blood glucose levels. The exocrine function of the pancreas, it's a little bit different, so it's not used for insulin or glucagon when it's exocrine. The exocrine function of the pancreas is going to be the secretion of pancreatic enzymes such as amylase, protease, lipase, and those enzymes are going to be used for digestive purposes. So protease, of course, breaks down proteins, lipase breaks down fats, and amylase breaks down carbohydrates. And it also releases something known as bicarbonate, and you should know from general chemistry that bicarbonate is a base. And why would the pancreas need to secrete a base? Well, remember, the alimentary canal is in some portions quite acidic due to hydrochloric acid being synthesized in the actual stomach. So we need a buffer for that hydrochloric acid, and that buffer comes from the actual pancreas in the form of bicarbonate so that the pH doesn't become too low and acidic in the actual alimentary canal. So the bicarbonate secreted by the actual pancreas is used for buffering the hydrochloric acid secreted by the stomach. So when we take a look at the structure of the pancreas, once again, oh my god, it kind of looks like corn on the cob in this diagram. Yeah, think of it like corn on the cob. It does look like corn on the cob a little bit. Yeah, I always just think it looks like a bunch of fat. But as you can see, it looks like corn on the cob in this diagram. And it can be broken up into 4 different regions: the head, the neck, the body, and the tail. What's circled in red here, let me erase this for you, is the head. Then you're going to have the neck. Then you're going to have the body. And then you're going to have the tail. The tail is what touches the spleen, and the head is what touches the actual descending duodenum. And if you ever need to find the pancreas, it's pretty simple to find. You can either find that celiac trunk, and it's going to be underneath the celiac trunk, or if you can find the descending duodenum, it's going to be right in the actual curvature of the descending duodenum, the head of the pancreas would be. And then if you needed to find the tail, find the spleen, and right next to the spleen should be the tail of the actual pancreas. And the pancreas is what we call retroperitoneal, meaning that it is not completely covered by the peritoneum. More specifically, The tail is not retroperitoneal. Okay, so we're taking a look here on the actual cadaver, and what you'll see about this actual cadaver is you'll see the actual pancreas right here. So there's your pancreas, this fatty-like thing, and here's the tail of the pancreas, and as you can see, the spleen would be over here, so it's more towards the spleen. Here is the body of the pancreas. Oh yeah, I should probably get out the laser pointer. Here is the body of the pancreas, the neck of the pancreas, and the head of the pancreas. And as you can see, it's making contact with the actual duodenum, descending duodenum to be more specific. And that makes sense because it's going to actually have the main pancreatic duct that empties into the descending duodenum, those exocrine and endocrine molecules. And then this right here in blue is just mesentery, so that fan-like substance. So the spleen is actually located in the left hypochondriac region. So the left quadrant has a region, the upper portion of the left quadrant is going to be known as the left hypochondriac region, and that's where you're going to find your spleen. Now the spleen serves a couple of purposes. The spleen is used to actually fight bloodborne pathogens. So if for some reason you contracted Ebola, Ebola would be filtered through the spleen. Your spleen would try to fight Ebola utilizing the actual T cells and B cells located in the actual spleen. It's also utilized to filter toxins and red blood cells. So abnormal red blood cells will actually be sent for recycling to the spleen and broken down in the spleen. And those red blood cells can also be stored in the spleen just as a reservoir. So three main functions. It's going to fight bloodborne pathogens, it's going to store red blood cells and recycle red blood cells, and it's also going to filter toxins from blood. So there are two ligaments you should keep in mind. There's a splenorenal ligament and a gastrosplenic ligament. The splenorenal ligament is going to connect the actual spleen to the kidney, and the gastrosplenic ligament actually attaches the spleen to the stomach. So splenorenal ligament and the gastrosplenic ligament, two ligaments you should know about the spleen. Splenorenal ligament connects the spleen to the actual kidney. Gastrosplenic ligament connects the spleen to the actual stomach. And the spleen is supplied blood via the splenic artery and the splenic vein. And remember, the splenic artery was that thick boy that's a branch of the celiac trunk. So there's your splenic artery right here, branch of the celiac trunk, and there's the splenic vein right here. Clinical relevance of the spleen. So if you ever get a lateral fracture of ribs 9 through 12, there is a chance that the fracture could puncture the actual spleen and cause the spleen to rupture or cause trauma to the spleen. And that can be a medical emergency. Not always, but it can be. What you need to keep in mind is it's ribs 9 through 12 in the left quadrant. So if it's ribs 9 through 12 on the right quadrant, not going to injure the spleen. Why is that? Because the spleen's not in the right quadrant. The spleen, remember, is in the left or the left hypochondriac quadrant, which is in the left quadrant. And if you get a fracture of ribs in the left quadrant, ribs 9 through 12 more specifically, you could actually damage and or rupture the spleen, which could be a medical emergency. And on a CT scan, here it is. Here's your gallbladder, liver, stomach, kidney. And then over here, there is the spleen. And you'll notice it's not, if you take a look on the liver, do you see how it's all nice, one gray color? It's all the same contrast. It's all that light gray, except for right here, but that's because that's the actual gallbladder. If you take a look on the spleen, you'll see these darker regions, and that's actually the spleen that's damaged. So there that I'm highlighting, those darker regions is actual trauma that's occurred to the spleen. And if you actually see that darker portion leaking out, it's actually ruptured. So as you can see, the spleen here, it's not all one continuous color. There's some darkening occurring in the spleen, and that's due to trauma occurring, most likely due to a fracture of ribs 9 through 12 on the right hypochondriac region. I meant left hypochondriac region, my bad. So there it is, it's sitting in the left hypochondriac region. And ribs 9 through 12, if you actually fracture them, they could protrude into the spleen and actually damage the spleen. And there's your liver in the right hypochondriac region. And then a little bit of it, the actual left lobe is in the epigastric region. And there's your stomach in the epigastric region. And then here's your pancreas right here. And then right here, can't really see it, but there is the actual splenic artery. So there is a splenic artery. Any questions with that? Here's the spleen actually removed from the body. There's the splenic artery that's supplying oxygenated blood to the spleen. There's the splenic vein supplying deoxygenated or taking deoxygenated blood away from the spleen. And here is the actual pancreas. So there's the tail of the pancreas. And as you can see, it actually makes contact with the spleen. So tail of the pancreas, splenic artery. Underneath that is the splenic vein. And with that being said, we are done. I hope